Marcus Webb stepped out of the black taxi and looked up at the tall glass building in front of him. The morning sun reflected off the windows of Horizon Technologies, the company he had started 15 years ago in a small garage with nothing but a dream and a laptop. Now it was the biggest spacecraft company in the world, with offices on 3 continents and a brand new factory on Mars. He had just spent 6 months on the red planet making sure everything was running smoothly, and he was tired but happy to be back on Earth. He was wearing old jeans, white sneakers, and a gray hoodie because he wanted to be comfortable after the long flight from the Mars transport station. His plan was simple: walk into the office quietly and see how things were going without anyone making a fuss. He wanted to see the real company, not the version people showed him when they knew the boss was watching. The main doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Marcus walked into the massive lobby. The floors were white marble and the walls were decorated with pictures of rockets and space stations. Right in the center of the room, hanging above the reception desk, was a giant portrait of himself in a suit, smiling confidently. He always felt a bit embarrassed about that painting, but the board of directors had insisted on it 5 years ago. A young woman with blonde hair tied back in a ponytail sat at the reception desk. Her name tag said Katie Brooks. She was typing something on her computer and didn't look up when Marcus approached. He waited patiently for a moment, then cleared his throat. Katie glanced up and her eyes moved from his face to his clothes and back again. Her expression changed from neutral to suspicious in less than a second. Marcus smiled and started to say hello, but Katie held up one hand to stop him. She pressed a button on her desk phone and spoke in a sharp voice that echoed slightly in the quiet lobby. She told someone that there was an unauthorized person in the building, and that they needed to come quickly. Marcus raised his eyebrows in surprise but decided to wait and see what would happen. This was already interesting. 2 security guards appeared from a side door within a minute. They were both large men wearing dark blue uniforms with the Horizon Technologies logo on their shoulders. One was older with gray hair, and the other was younger with a thick neck and arms that looked like he spent a lot of time at the gym. They walked toward Marcus with serious expressions, their hands resting on their belts near their radios. Katie stood up from her desk and pointed at Marcus. She told the guards that he had refused to leave when she asked him to, which wasn't exactly true since she hadn't given him a chance to explain anything. The older guard stepped forward and asked Marcus what his business was in the building. His tone was polite but firm, the kind of voice that expected immediate cooperation. Marcus reached into his pocket to pull out his wallet, but both guards tensed up immediately. The younger one even moved his hand toward the taser on his belt. Marcus slowly held up both hands to show he wasn't a threat, then very carefully took out his wallet. He pulled out his identification card and his company's security badge, which had his name, photo, and the words Chief Executive Officer printed in bold letters. He handed both items to the older guard. The guard looked at the cards for maybe 3 seconds, then handed them back to Marcus without really examining them. He said that anyone could make fake identification these days, and that Marcus needed to leave the building immediately, or they would call the police. Marcus felt a familiar feeling in his chest, a mix of anger and disappointment that he had experienced too many times in his life. He had built a company worth billions of dollars. He had created thousands of jobs. He had pushed humanity further into space than anyone thought possible, and here he was being kicked out of his own building because of how he looked. More employees were starting to gather in the lobby now. Some were arriving for work, swiping their badges at the security gates. Others had heard the commotion and come down from their offices to see what was happening. Marcus looked around at the faces staring at him. There were maybe 30 people watching now, and not a single one of them recognized him. Not one person looked at his face and connected it to the giant portrait hanging just 20 feet above their heads. Katie called out from behind her desk that she had already notified the police and that they were on their way. The younger security guard moved closer to Marcus and told him that he could either walk out on his own or be escorted out in handcuffs. His voice was threatening, and there was something in his eyes that Marcus recognized all too well. It was the look of someone who had already decided that Marcus was a problem, a criminal, someone who didn't belong in a place like this. Marcus took a deep breath and made a decision. He could argue with these people. He could raise his voice and demand to see someone from upper management. He could get angry and make a scene. But instead, he reached into his other pocket and pulled out his personal tablet. It was a custom model, made specifically for him by the company's technology division. The screen lit up when it recognized his fingerprint, and he tapped a few icons quickly. The tablet connected wirelessly to the building's main computer system. Marcus entered his personal access code, a 16-digit number that only he knew, followed by a biometric scan that read his thumbprint and the unique pattern of veins in his hand. The system processed the information in less than 2 seconds, and then everything changed. Every screen in the lobby suddenly flickered and changed to show the same image: Marcus's official employee profile, complete with his photo, full name, job title, and security clearance level. The large display screens that usually showed company news and stock prices now showed his credentials in letters 3 feet tall. The computerized voice of the building's artificial intelligence system spoke through the overhead speakers, calm and clear and impossible to ignore. It announced that Marcus Alexander Webb, founder and chief executive officer of Horizon Technologies, had been verified and authenticated with absolute access to all systems and facilities. The lobby went completely silent. Marcus looked at Katie, whose face had turned as white as the marble floor. He looked at the 2 security guards, who suddenly seemed very interested in their shoes. The silence in the lobby stretched out for what felt like a full minute, but was probably only 10 seconds. Marcus stood quietly with his tablet in his hand, watching the reactions of everyone around him. Katie had sat down heavily in her chair and was staring at her computer screen like she wished she could disappear into it. The younger security guard had taken 2 steps backward, his face red with embarrassment or maybe fear. The older guard was looking back and forth between Marcus and the giant screens displaying his credentials, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. Then the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby opened with a soft chime, and people started pouring out. Marcus recognized most of them: his executive team, the people he had hired personally to help run different parts of the company. There was Linda Hayes, his chief operating officer, a sharp woman in her 50s who had worked in the aerospace industry for 30 years before Marcus convinced her to join his startup. Behind her came Gregory Stone, the head of human resources, practically running across the lobby in his expensive suit. Several vice presidents followed, along with department heads and senior managers, all of them looking panicked and confused. Linda reached Marcus first and immediately started apologizing. She spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to explain how sorry she was and how this should never have happened, and how they would fix everything right away. Gregory was right behind her, already pulling out his phone and making notes, probably preparing to fire someone. Marcus held up his hand to stop them both from talking. He looked around the lobby at all the faces staring at him, his executives, the security guards, Katie at the reception desk, and the regular employees who had stopped on their way to work to watch the drama unfold. Marcus spoke in a calm voice that somehow carried across the entire lobby even though he wasn't shouting. He said that he didn't want anyone to panic or start pointing fingers just yet. He said that what happened this morning was not about one receptionist or 2 security guards making a mistake. It was about something much bigger, something that he needed to understand before they could fix it. He told Linda and Gregory that he wanted to meet with them in 1 hour in his office, and until then, everyone should go back to their normal work. He said this firmly but kindly, the way a parent might speak to children who had done something wrong but deserved a chance to explain. The crowd started to break up slowly. People moved toward the elevators and security gates, but they kept looking back over their shoulders at Marcus. He could hear them whispering to each other, their voices buzzing like bees in a hive. Katie was still sitting at her desk, and Marcus walked over to her. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes, and he could see that she was terrified. She started to apologize, her voice shaking, but Marcus gently interrupted her. He told Katie that he wasn't angry at her personally. He said that she had made a judgment based on what she saw, and he wanted to understand why she saw what she saw. He asked her a simple question. When she looked at him walking into the building in casual clothes, what had she thought? Katie hesitated, clearly afraid to answer honestly, but Marcus waited patiently. Finally, she admitted that she had thought he looked suspicious, that he didn't look like someone who belonged in a corporate headquarters, that she was just trying to keep the building safe. Marcus nodded slowly and thanked her for being honest. He told her that they would talk more later, but for now she should take a break and maybe get some coffee. Then he turned to the 2 security guards who were still standing nearby, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. The older guard started to stammer an apology, but Marcus stopped him too. He said that he wanted all the security staff to meet with him tomorrow morning, and they would discuss proper procedures and protocols. His tone made it clear that this wasn't optional. Marcus rode the elevator up to the top floor where his office was located. The doors opened directly into a reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Seattle skyline. His assistant, a competent man named Chris Martinez who had been with the company for 8 years, jumped up from his desk when he saw Marcus. Chris had obviously heard about what happened downstairs because he looked embarrassed and started apologizing immediately. Marcus told him the same thing he had told everyone else. No apologies yet, just information. He asked Chris to do something for him. He wanted access to all the security footage from the main lobby for the past 6 months. He wanted the personnel files for Katie Brooks and the 2 security guards from this morning. He wanted the company's diversity reports for the last 3 years. He wanted any complaints or incidents that had been filed with Human Resources regarding discrimination or harassment, and he wanted all of this delivered to his office within 2 hours, marked as confidential and for his eyes only. Chris nodded and made notes, his fingers flying across his tablet. He asked if there was anything else Marcus needed, and Marcus said yes. He wanted Chris to quietly set up a series of anonymous meetings with employees from different departments and different levels of the company. He didn't want anyone to know that these meetings were happening or who was attending them. He wanted to talk to people who might not feel comfortable speaking honestly if they knew they were talking to the chief executive officer. Marcus walked into his office and closed the door behind him. The room was exactly as he had left it 6 months ago. A large desk made of dark wood, comfortable chairs for visitors, shelves filled with books and models of spacecraft, and windows on 2 walls that let in plenty of natural light. He had always kept his office simple and functional. Unlike some executives who filled their spaces with expensive art and fancy furniture to impress people, he sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. While he waited for the information he had requested, he started doing his own research. He logged into the company's internal systems and started looking at data. He pulled up employee demographics and noticed something interesting. On paper, Horizon Technologies looked very diverse. They had employees from dozens of countries, speaking dozens of languages, representing many different ethnicities and backgrounds. The numbers looked good, the kind of numbers that would make investors and the media happy. But when Marcus dug deeper, he started to see patterns. He looked at who got promoted and how quickly. He looked at salary data for people with similar job titles and qualifications. He looked at which departments had the most diversity and which were mostly homogeneous. He looked at turnover rates and exit interview data. The more he looked, the more concerned he became. An hour later, Linda and Gregory arrived for their meeting. Marcus invited them to sit down and asked them to close the door. Linda and Gregory sat down in the chairs facing Marcus's desk, both of them looking nervous and uncomfortable. Linda kept smoothing down her skirt even though it didn't need smoothing, and Gregory was gripping his tablet so tightly that his knuckles were turning white. Marcus let the silence sit for a moment while he gathered his thoughts. He wasn't angry at these 2 people specifically, but he was disappointed, and he needed them to understand the seriousness of what had happened. Marcus started by telling them what he had seen that morning from his perspective. He described walking into the building excited to be home, looking forward to surprising everyone and seeing how the company was doing. He described the immediate suspicion on Katie's face, the way she had called security without even asking his name, the way the guards had dismissed his identification without really looking at it. He described standing in his own lobby, surrounded by his own employees, with his own portrait hanging over their heads and not a single person recognizing him. Gregory started to interrupt, probably to offer explanations or excuses, but Marcus held up his hand. He said he wasn't finished. He told them about the look in the younger security guard's eyes, that particular combination of contempt and aggression that Marcus had seen too many times in his life. He told them about the 30 or so employees who had watched the whole thing happen, and how none of them had stepped forward to help or to question what was going on. He asked a simple question. How could this happen in a company that prided itself on innovation and forward thinking? Linda took a deep breath and said that she didn't have a good answer. She admitted that they had clearly failed somewhere, that there were problems they hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to see. Gregory agreed and said that he would immediately begin an investigation into the security department and review their hiring and training procedures. Marcus nodded but said that this went deeper than just security. He asked them both to think honestly about the company culture they had built. He turned his laptop around so they could see the screen. He had prepared a presentation with charts and graphs all pulling from the company's own data. The first slide showed promotion rates broken down by ethnicity. The pattern was clear. White employees got promoted faster and more frequently than employees of color, even when their performance reviews were identical. The second slide showed salary data, and again the pattern was obvious. The third slide showed complaints filed with human resources over the past 3 years. 17 cases of alleged discrimination or harassment, and only 2 had resulted in any disciplinary action. Gregory's face went pale as he looked at the numbers. He started to say something about how they had tried to address these issues, how they had diversity initiatives and training programs, but the words sounded weak, even as he said them. Linda was shaking her head slowly, her expression a mix of shock and shame. She said that she had no idea the gaps were this large, that she had trusted the reports she received without digging into the raw data herself. Marcus closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. He told them that he believed they were good people who genuinely wanted to do the right thing, but good intentions weren't enough. The company had grown so fast over the past decade that they had lost track of their core values. They had focused so much on building rockets and winning contracts that they had forgotten to build a culture where everyone could thrive. He said that this was ultimately his failure as a leader, because he had been so focused on the technical and business sides that he hadn't paid enough attention to the human side. He laid out what he wanted to happen next. First, he wanted a complete audit of all human resources practices: hiring, promotion, compensation, complaint procedures, everything. He wanted this audit done by an outside firm with no connection to the company, and he wanted the results to be completely transparent. Second, he wanted every single employee to go through updated bias training, starting with the executive team. Third, he wanted to create an anonymous reporting system where employees could raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Fourth, he wanted to establish a diversity council with real power to make changes, not just a symbolic committee that met once a quarter and accomplished nothing. Gregory was taking notes frantically on his tablet, nodding as Marcus spoke. Linda asked how quickly he wanted all of this implemented, and Marcus said immediately. He didn't want to wait for the perfect plan or the ideal timing. He wanted action now, even if it meant making mistakes along the way. He said that he would rather try and fail than not try at all. Then Marcus told them something that surprised both of them. He said that he was going to spend the next month working undercover in different parts of the company. He would use a fake name and a fake background, and he would take entry-level jobs in various departments. He wanted to see and hear what life was really like for regular employees, not the sanitized version that made its way up to the executive suite. He wanted Linda and Gregory to coordinate this, but only the 3 of them could know about it. Linda immediately objected. She said it was too risky, that if anyone found out it could cause all kinds of legal and public relations problems. She said that as chief executive officer, Marcus had responsibilities that he couldn't just abandon for a month. Gregory agreed, and added that there were other ways to gather information without going to such extremes. Marcus listened to their concerns but said that his mind was made up. He had spent 6 months on Mars working alongside engineers and construction crews, and he had learned more about his company in that time than he had learned in years of reading reports and attending meetings. He told them to think of it as an extended version of those undercover boss television shows that used to be popular, except this would be real and private. He would document everything he saw and heard, and at the end of the month, they would use that information to make concrete changes. He asked them to trust him and to help make this happen. After a long pause, Linda sighed and said that if he was determined to do this, they would support him. Gregory reluctantly agreed. The rest of the afternoon was busy with meetings and preparations. Marcus met with his legal team to make sure his undercover plan wouldn't create liability issues. He met with Chris Martinez to set up the logistics: false employment records, a temporary place to stay where no one would recognize him, a new wardrobe of ordinary work clothes. He met with his public relations director to craft a careful message for the media in case word got out about what happened that morning. But the most important meeting was the one Marcus had at 6 o'clock that evening. Chris had arranged for 5 employees to come to a conference room on the 3rd floor for what they were told was a routine focus group about workplace satisfaction. The employees represented different departments and different backgrounds. A junior software developer named Danny Kim, a maintenance worker named Carlos Rivera, a sales associate named Nicole Turner, a research scientist named Priya Patel, and an administrative assistant named Jerome Williams. Marcus waited until all 5 employees were seated in the conference room before he walked in. He had changed out of his hoodie and jeans into a more professional outfit, though still not the formal suit and tie that he usually wore for official meetings. He wanted them to feel comfortable, not intimidated. He introduced himself simply, thanked them for coming, and explained that he wanted to have an honest conversation about their experiences working at Horizon Technologies. At first, the employees were clearly nervous. They gave careful, diplomatic answers to his questions, the kind of responses people give when they think their boss's boss's boss is listening. Marcus could see them weighing every word, trying to figure out what he wanted to hear, so he changed his approach. He told them about what had happened to him that morning in the lobby, describing every detail without holding anything back. He talked about how it felt to be judged and dismissed based on his appearance. He talked about his own experiences with racism throughout his life. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The employees began to relax slightly, and their answers became more honest. Nicole Turner, the sales associate, was the first to really open up. She was a black woman in her 30s who had been with the company for 4 years. She said that she loved the work itself, but that she often felt invisible in meetings. She described how her ideas were frequently ignored, until a male colleague would say the same thing 5 minutes later and get credit for it. She talked about being called aggressive when she advocated strongly for her clients, while her white male co-workers were praised for being passionate and driven. Danny Kim, the young software developer, nodded in agreement as Nicole spoke. He shared his own story about being passed over for a promotion, despite having better performance metrics than the person who got the job. When he asked his manager why, he was told that the other candidate was a better cultural fit. Danny said he had always wondered what that phrase really meant, whether it was code for something else. He said he had considered leaving the company several times but stayed because he believed in the mission of expanding human presence in space. Carlos Rivera, the maintenance worker, spoke with a thick accent. He said that people often assumed he didn't speak English well and would talk slowly and loudly to him as if he were a child. He had a degree in engineering from a university in Mexico, but when he immigrated to the United States, he couldn't get his credentials recognized. He took the maintenance job at Horizon Technologies, hoping to work his way up, but 5 years later, he was still cleaning floors and fixing broken equipment. He had applied for engineering positions internally 3 times and never even got an interview. Priya Patel, the research scientist, said that her experience had been different but still frustrating. She was one of the few women in her department, and she often dealt with colleagues who questioned her expertise or talked over her in meetings. She had published papers in major scientific journals and held 2 patents, but she still had to work twice as hard as her male colleagues to get the same recognition. She said that she had filed a complaint with Human Resources about a co-worker who made inappropriate comments, but nothing had come of it. The investigation went nowhere, and she was left feeling like she had wasted her time. Jerome Williams, the administrative assistant, was quiet for most of the meeting. He was a young black man, probably in his mid-20s, and he seemed the most nervous about speaking freely. Marcus gently encouraged him to share his thoughts, promising that nothing said in this room would be used against anyone. Finally, Jerome talked about how he was often mistaken for a delivery person or a temp worker, even though he had been with the company for 3 years. He described security guards following him when he walked through the building after hours, even though his badge clearly showed he had clearance to be there. Marcus listened to all of them without interrupting, taking notes on his tablet. When they were finished, he thanked them for their honesty and their courage. He told them that their experiences were not unique, that he had heard similar stories from other employees. He said that the company had failed them, and he took personal responsibility for that failure. He promised that things were going to change, and he asked for their help in making those changes real and lasting. He explained the initiatives he was planning: the independent audit, the bias training, the anonymous reporting system, the diversity council. Then he asked each of them if they would be willing to serve on that council. He said he wanted people who had actually experienced the problems, not just executives who had read about them in reports. All 5 agreed, some more enthusiastically than others. Jerome looked particularly surprised and honored to be asked. The meeting ended after nearly 2 hours. As the employees filed out, Marcus felt both energized and exhausted. He had learned more in that one conversation than he had from months of reading reports and metrics. These were real people with real stories, and he had a responsibility to them. He stayed in the conference room for a while after they left, reviewing his notes and thinking about what came next. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus had similar meetings with dozens of other employees. He talked to people from every department and every level of the company. He heard stories of discrimination and exclusion, but he also heard stories of hope and resilience. He met employees who loved working at Horizon Technologies despite the problems, who believed in the mission strongly enough to put up with difficulties that they shouldn't have to face. Their dedication humbled him and strengthened his resolve to make things better. The data from the human resources audit started coming in, and it confirmed everything Marcus had suspected. The problems were systemic and deep-rooted. They weren't just about a few bad actors or isolated incidents. They were about unconscious biases baked into processes and procedures, about a culture that claimed to value diversity but didn't actually support it in practice. The audit report was hundreds of pages long, filled with statistics and analysis, but the conclusion was simple. Horizon Technologies talked a good game about equality, but didn't live up to its own ideals. Marcus brought the executive team together to review the findings. The meeting was tense and uncomfortable. Some of the executives were defensive, insisting that they had tried their best and that you couldn't expect perfection. Others were more receptive, acknowledging the failures and asking what they could do differently. Marcus cut through the debate with a simple statement. From now on, diversity and inclusion would be part of every executive's performance review, weighted just as heavily as financial targets and operational goals. If someone couldn't create an equitable workplace, they wouldn't be considered successful no matter how good their other numbers looked. This announcement caused immediate friction. 2 vice presidents pushed back hard, arguing that this was unfair and that Marcus was prioritizing politics over business results. Marcus remained calm but firm. He said that creating a fair workplace wasn't politics, it was basic human decency and also good business. He pointed to research showing that diverse teams were more innovative and more effective. He said that if they couldn't get on board with this direction, they were welcome to find opportunities elsewhere. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus knew he was taking a risk, that he might lose some talented people over this, but he also knew that if he backed down now, nothing would really change. The company would issue some press releases and run some training sessions, and then everything would slowly drift back to the way it had been. The following Monday morning, Marcus started his undercover assignment. He had enrolled himself in the company's system as Marcus Johnson, a new hire in the logistics department. His fake background said he had worked in warehouse management for several smaller companies and was looking for more stable employment. Chris Martinez had helped him rent a small apartment across town and had coached him on the details of his cover story. Marcus had even grown out his beard a bit and started wearing glasses with clear lenses to change his appearance slightly. His first day was like any new employee's first day. He sat through orientation sessions where a cheerful human resources representative named Stephanie Moore explained company policies and benefits. He filled out paperwork and watched training videos about safety procedures and workplace conduct. None of the other new hires recognized him, which was both encouraging and a little sad. The chief executive officer's face should have been familiar to people joining the company, but clearly it wasn't. Marcus was assigned to work in the main distribution center, a huge warehouse about 20 miles from headquarters where the company received, stored, and shipped parts and materials. His supervisor was a man named Frank Cooper, a gruff 40-something who had worked in logistics for 20 years. Frank gave Marcus a brief tour of the facility, showed him where to clock in and out, and explained that his job would be to help manage inventory and coordinate shipments with the manufacturing facilities. The work was physically demanding and mentally tedious. Marcus spent his days scanning barcodes, moving boxes, and updating computer systems. He worked alongside a diverse crew of warehouse workers, immigrants from a dozen countries, young people just starting their careers, older workers who had been doing this kind of labor for decades. The pay was decent by warehouse standards, but Marcus quickly realized it wasn't enough to live comfortably in Seattle, especially for workers with families. During lunch breaks, Marcus sat with his co-workers and listened to their conversations. He heard complaints about scheduling, about managers who played favorites, about the lack of opportunities for advancement. He heard workers discuss how they had to work second jobs just to make ends meet. He heard stories about injuries that happened because safety protocols weren't always followed when the warehouse was busy. Nobody knew who he really was, so they spoke freely around him. One co-worker, a woman named Lisa Chen, who had immigrated from Taiwan 5 years ago, told Marcus that she had a degree in mechanical engineering, but couldn't find work in her field because her English wasn't perfect and her credentials weren't recognized in the United States. She had been working in the warehouse for 2 years, hoping to eventually transition into an engineering role, but she had never been able to get an interview. She said she had given up hope and was just grateful to have steady work. Marcus met another worker named Kevin Brown, a young black man fresh out of community college who had dreams of becoming a spacecraft designer. Kevin had applied for an entry-level engineering position 3 times and never gotten past the first screening. He didn't understand why, because his grades were good and he had relevant coursework. Someone in human resources had told him to get more experience and try again later. But he couldn't figure out how to get experience if nobody would hire him. Working in the warehouse was supposed to be temporary, but temporary was starting to feel permanent. After 2 weeks in the warehouse, Marcus transferred himself to a different department. He became Marcus Johnson, the junior accountant, working in the finance division at headquarters. The environment was completely different. Quiet offices instead of noisy warehouses, business casual dress codes instead of work boots and safety vests, computer screens instead of forklifts and pallets. But some of the underlying issues were surprisingly similar. In the accounting department, Marcus noticed that the few employees of color tended to be concentrated in the lower-level positions. The senior accountants and managers were almost exclusively white. During team meetings, he observed that suggestions from minority employees were often dismissed or ignored, only to be praised when a white colleague made the same suggestion later. He saw subtle exclusions, after-work social events that somehow only certain people heard about, informal mentoring relationships that seemed to follow racial lines, inside jokes and references that made it clear who was really part of the inner circle and who wasn't. Marcus befriended a Latina accountant named Sofia Ramirez, who had been with the company for 6 years. She was smart, hardworking, and detail-oriented, but she had been passed over for promotion 4 times. Each time, the position went to someone with less experience and weaker performance reviews. Sophia said she had raised concerns with her manager and with human resources, but nothing changed. She was starting to look for jobs at other companies because she felt like she had hit a ceiling at Horizon Technologies. The most revealing moment came during a casual conversation in the break room. Marcus was getting coffee when 2 senior managers walked in, not noticing him standing by the machine. They were talking about candidates for an open director position. One of them mentioned a highly qualified woman of color who had applied, and the other manager immediately dismissed her. He said something about her being too risky, that they needed someone who could fit in with the executive culture, someone who could play golf with clients and attend fundraisers. The implication was clear even though he never said it directly. They wanted someone who looked like them. Marcus wanted to confront them right there, to reveal who he was and challenge their assumptions. But he kept his cover and his mouth shut, making a mental note of their names and the conversation. This was exactly the kind of thing he needed to document. These weren't overtly racist statements that would show up in an investigation. They were subtle, coded language that maintained the status quo while providing plausible deniability. For his 3rd assignment, Marcus moved to the engineering department as a junior technician. This was closer to his actual background, so he had to be more careful about revealing too much knowledge. He worked on routine maintenance and testing of spacecraft components, the unglamorous but essential work that kept everything running. The engineering floor was where he saw some of the most blatant problems. There was a culture of overwork that bordered on abusive. Engineers were expected to put in 60 or 70 hours a week, and anyone who left at a reasonable hour was seen as not committed enough. This particularly impacted women and people with families who had responsibilities outside of work. Marcus watched as talented engineers burned out and left the company, only to be replaced by younger workers who didn't yet know that the pace was unsustainable. He also witnessed harassment that made him angry enough that he almost broke his cover. A female engineer named Amy Foster was subjected to inappropriate comments and jokes from her male colleagues. When she objected, she was told she was being too sensitive and couldn't take a joke. Marcus saw her file a complaint with Human Resources, and he watched as nothing meaningful happened. The men who harassed her received a warning, but their behavior didn't change. Amy started looking for a new job within a week. Marcus documented everything he saw over the course of a month. He took notes on his personal tablet each evening, compiling a detailed picture of what life was really like for employees at different levels and in different parts of the company. The picture wasn't entirely negative. He met many good people who tried to do the right thing, who treated their colleagues with respect regardless of background. But he also saw enough problems to know that major changes were necessary. When Marcus ended his undercover assignment and returned to his role as chief executive officer, he felt like he had been gone for much longer than a month. He had seen his company through completely different eyes, and he couldn't unsee what he had learned. The problems were worse than he had imagined, more pervasive and more ingrained, but he had also discovered something hopeful. There were many employees who genuinely cared about making things better and who were just waiting for leadership to take these issues seriously. Marcus called a meeting of the entire executive team for a Monday morning. He had prepared a presentation based on his undercover work, with names and identifying details changed to protect the people he had talked to. He showed them video clips he had secretly recorded of discriminatory behavior, played audio of conversations where managers made biased decisions, and shared dozens of stories from employees at all levels. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss. Some of the executives were shocked and genuinely seemed to have no idea these problems existed. Others looked uncomfortable, probably realizing that they had been part of the problem. A few tried to explain or minimize what they were seeing, but Marcus shut down those attempts quickly. He said that the time for excuses was over, and now was the time for action. He announced that he was implementing immediate changes, and anyone who couldn't support these changes would need to find employment elsewhere. The first change was a complete overhaul of the hiring process. From now on, all job postings would be reviewed to remove biased language. Interview panels would be diverse and would receive training on how to evaluate candidates fairly. The company would actively recruit from historically black colleges and universities, Hispanic-serving institutions, and other schools with diverse student bodies. Resume screening would be done with names and other identifying information hidden to reduce unconscious bias. The second change was a new promotion system. Instead of managers deciding promotions behind closed doors, there would be a transparent process with clear criteria. Employees would be evaluated based on objective performance metrics, and promotion decisions would be reviewed by a committee that included representatives from the Diversity Council. Any manager who consistently promoted only people who looked like them would be required to explain why. The third change was about accountability. Every manager would receive training on recognizing and addressing bias. They would be evaluated not just on their department's productivity, but on their ability to create an inclusive environment. Anonymous surveys would measure how employees felt about fairness and respect in their teams, and these scores would factor into manager bonuses and promotions. Managers who created hostile environments would be demoted or terminated, regardless of their other accomplishments. The fourth change was about compensation. The company would conduct a comprehensive pay equity study and immediately address any unjustified gaps. Going forward, salary decisions would be regularly audited to ensure fairness. The Human Resources Department would publish annual reports on pay equity, broken down by gender, race, and other demographics. The announcement of these changes sent shockwaves through the company. Most employees were supportive and even excited about the new direction. They felt like someone was finally taking their concerns seriously. But there was also resistance, particularly from some managers and executives who saw the changes as threatening their power or questioning their judgment. Within a week, 3 executives submitted their resignations. One was Henry Clark, the head of security who had tried to remove Marcus from the lobby. Henry wrote a bitter resignation letter complaining about political correctness and saying that the company was abandoning merit in favor of quotas. Marcus accepted his resignation immediately and promoted Patricia Johnson, one of the security officers who had spoken up about bias in the department, to take his place. The second resignation came from a vice president of engineering named Ronald Hayes. He had been with the company for 10 years and was well respected for his technical knowledge. But he told Marcus in a private meeting that he couldn't work in an environment where he had to constantly worry about whether his decisions would be called discriminatory. He said that the new policies made it impossible to manage effectively. Marcus tried to explain that fair treatment and effective management weren't mutually exclusive, but Ronald had made up his mind. The third and most painful resignation came from someone Marcus had considered a friend. Peter Newman had been Marcus's roommate in college, had helped him write the business plan for Horizon Technologies, and had been the vice president of advanced projects since the company's early days. Peter came to Marcus's office on a Friday evening and said that he couldn't support what Marcus was doing. He said that Marcus was letting one bad experience turn into an obsession, that he was risking the company's success to make a political statement. Marcus listened to Peter's complaints and then asked him a simple question. Did Peter really think that treating people fairly was political? Peter responded that it wasn't about fairness, it was about Marcus suddenly acting like everything they had built was racist. Marcus shook his head and said that he wasn't calling Peter racist, but that they had built systems that produced racist outcomes whether they intended them to or not. The difference between intent and impact mattered. Peter stood up to leave and said that Marcus had changed, that success and wealth had made him forget where he came from. Marcus felt a flash of anger at that comment because it was so completely wrong. He said that success hadn't changed him. It had given him the power to do something about problems he had seen his entire life. He said that if Peter couldn't understand that, then maybe they had never really known each other as well as Marcus thought. The two men shook hands awkwardly and Peter left. Marcus sat alone in his office for a long time afterward, feeling the weight of lost friendship. He wondered if he was doing the right thing, if the cost was too high. But then he thought about Lisa Chen in the warehouse who couldn't use her engineering degree, about Kevin Brown, who couldn't get anyone to look at his applications, about Sophia Ramirez, who kept getting passed over for promotion, about Amy Foster, who was harassed and ignored. He thought about his own experience in the lobby, being judged and dismissed in the building he had created. The cost of not changing was higher than the cost of changing. The company's stock price dropped by 8% in the 2 weeks following the executive departures. Financial news outlets ran stories questioning whether Marcus was putting ideology ahead of business. Conservative commentators criticized him for embracing what they called woke culture. Some investors called for his removal as chief executive officer, saying that he was destroying shareholder value. But Marcus also received thousands of messages of support from employees, from customers, and from people around the world who were inspired by what he was trying to do. Several major clients, including government space agencies and commercial satellite companies, publicly praised Horizon Technologies for taking concrete action on diversity and inclusion. 2 prestigious universities reached out to discuss partnerships that would help the company recruit talented graduates from underrepresented backgrounds. Marcus held firm through the criticism and the uncertainty. He spent his days meeting with employees, listening to their ideas for how to make the company better. He promoted several people who had been overlooked for years, including Carlos Rivera from the warehouse, who finally got a chance to work as an engineer. He created mentorship programs pairing senior employees with junior employees from different backgrounds. He established scholarship funds for students studying aerospace engineering at schools serving minority communities. 6 months into the transformation of Horizon Technologies, something happened that nobody on Earth had expected. The signals started appearing on radio telescopes around the world, organized patterns of electromagnetic radiation coming from beyond the solar system. At first, scientists thought it might be some kind of natural phenomenon they hadn't encountered before, but as they analyzed the data more carefully, the conclusion became unavoidable. Someone was trying to communicate with humanity. The world erupted in a mixture of excitement, fear, and wonder. News networks ran constant coverage speculating about who or what was sending the signals. Religious leaders debated what it meant for humanity's place in the universe. Scientists worked frantically to decode the messages and formulate responses. Governments met in emergency sessions to coordinate humanity's reaction to the most important moment in human history. Marcus followed the developments like everyone else, watching the news and reading updates from the scientific community. As the head of a major spacecraft manufacturer, he was brought into some of the high-level discussions about how humanity should respond. But mostly he continued focusing on his work at Horizon Technologies. figuring that first contact with aliens was beyond his pay grade and expertise. 3 months after the first signals were detected, everything changed again. A spacecraft appeared in orbit around Earth, arriving so suddenly that no one had detected it approaching. It was massive, maybe 5 times the size of the International Space Station, and it used technology that defied human understanding of physics. The ship sent a simple message in dozens of Earth languages. They came in peace and requested permission to send a diplomatic delegation to meet with human leaders. The United Nations scrambled to organize humanity's response. They set up a first contact committee that included representatives from major governments, scientific organizations, and surprisingly, several leaders from private industry. Marcus received a call from the Secretary General asking him to be part of this committee. They wanted people who understood advanced technology and space exploration, and Horizon Technologies was at the forefront of human spaceflight capability. Marcus flew to New York and joined a group of about 30 people from around the world in a secure conference room at UN headquarters. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and nervousness. Nobody knew what to expect from actual face-to-face contact with alien beings. The delegates from the ship, who called themselves the Tarathi, had requested a meeting in 1 week to give humanity time to prepare. During that week, the First Contact Committee met daily to discuss protocols, questions, and concerns. Marcus mostly listened as diplomats and scientists debated various scenarios, but he contributed when the conversation turned to practical matters about spacecraft technology and what the Tarathi ship might be capable of. He found himself fascinated by the engineering challenges that the aliens had apparently solved, things that humanity was still decades or centuries away from achieving. The day of first contact arrived. The Tarathi sent down a small shuttlecraft that landed at a specially prepared site in neutral territory in Switzerland. 3 beings emerged from the craft, and they were startling to look at. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but clearly not human, taller than most people, with skin that had a slight blue-gray tint and large eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. They wore simple garments that might have been uniforms or might have been their normal clothing. The lead Tarathi, who introduced himself through a translation device as Ambassador Kelvin, spoke to the assembled human representatives in a calm, measured voice. He explained that his people had been observing Earth for several decades, studying human civilization from a distance. They were part of something called the Galactic Community, a loose federation of intelligent species that cooperated on matters of trade, science, and mutual security. The Tarathi had been tasked with determining whether humanity was ready to join this community. Ambassador Kelvin explained that technological advancement was only one factor in determining readiness. The galactic community had learned over thousands of years that species needed a certain level of social development before they could successfully interact with other civilizations. Species that were too internally divided, too aggressive, too exploitative, or too discriminatory tended to create problems when they encountered others. The galaxy had seen wars and disasters caused by bringing immature species into the community too quickly. He said that the Tarathi had been watching humanity's recent history with particular interest. They had seen wars and conflicts, environmental destruction and greed. But they had also seen cooperation and compassion, art and science, people working together to solve problems and help each other. Humanity was on the edge, capable of going in either direction. The purpose of this first contact was to have honest conversations about where humanity was heading and whether they were truly ready to join the larger community. Over the next several days, the Tarathi met with various groups of humans, government leaders, scientists, religious figures, artists, and business leaders. Marcus participated in several of these sessions, answering questions about human spaceflight capabilities and ambitions. He found Ambassador Kelvin to be remarkably perceptive, asking questions that got to the heart of complex issues quickly. On the 4th day, Marcus was surprised to be called into a private meeting with Ambassador Kelvin and 2 other Tarathi. They met in a small conference room with just a translator present. The ambassador began by saying that they had been specifically studying Horizon Technologies and its recent transformation. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. The aliens had been watching his company, had seen what happened in the lobby, had observed everything that followed. Ambassador Kelvin explained that the Tarathi had technology, that allowed them to monitor communications and observe events on Earth in great detail. They tried to minimize this surveillance to respect human privacy, but they needed to understand human civilization thoroughly before making contact. He said that they had observed the incident at Horizon Technologies headquarters 6 months ago, when Marcus was denied entry to his own building. The ambassador continued, saying that discrimination based on physical appearance was unfortunately common among emerging intelligent species. Most species went through a phase where they divided themselves into groups based on arbitrary characteristics and treated those outside their group as lesser. The ability to move beyond this phase was one of the key indicators of social maturity. Species that couldn't overcome their prejudices tended to destroy themselves, or remained isolated because they couldn't function in a diverse galactic community. Marcus listened carefully, unsure where this conversation was going. Then Ambassador Kelvin said something that stunned him. The Tarathi had been close to deciding that humanity wasn't ready for contact. The levels of discrimination, inequality, and conflict on Earth were concerning. But then they observed Marcus's response to what happened in the lobby. They watched as he investigated his own company, went undercover to understand the real experiences of his employees, and implemented meaningful changes despite resistance and personal cost. The ambassador explained that this kind of moral leadership was rare and valuable. It demonstrated a capacity for self-reflection and growth that gave them hope for humanity's future. Marcus's actions didn't solve all of humanity's problems, but they showed that humans were capable of recognizing injustice and taking concrete action to address it, even when it was difficult or unpopular. This was exactly the kind of behavior that the galactic community looked for in potential member species. Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, processing what Ambassador Kelvin had just told him. The idea that his personal experience and response to discrimination had influenced humanity's first contact with an alien civilization was overwhelming. He had made those changes at Horizon Technologies because it was the right thing to do, not because he thought aliens were watching. The notion that his actions had been under observation by beings from another world was both humbling and slightly terrifying. Ambassador Kelvin seemed to understand Marcus's thoughts without him speaking. The Tarathi explained that they weren't judging humanity based on one person's actions, but rather looking for signs of broader potential. The fact that Marcus had power and used it to address injustice rather than ignore it or perpetuate it was significant. The fact that many Horizon Technologies employees supported the changes and engaged constructively with the process was equally important. The resistance and criticism Marcus faced was actually expected and even somewhat positive, because it showed that change was real and meaningful, not just superficial. The ambassador then asked Marcus a question that would stay with him for the rest of his life. What did he think was the most important quality for a species trying to reach the stars? Marcus thought carefully before answering. He said that he used to think it was intelligence or technological capability or ambition, but after everything he had experienced in the past year, he believed the most important quality was the ability to recognize the humanity in others, to treat every person with dignity regardless of their appearance or background. Without that foundation, all the technology and intelligence in the world would just be used to create more sophisticated ways to harm each other. Ambassador Kelvin nodded approvingly. He said that Marcus had understood something that took many species much longer to learn. The galaxy was vast and filled with incredible diversity, beings of different shapes, colors, sizes, and ways of thinking. Species that couldn't handle diversity within their own populations had no chance of successfully interacting with truly alien civilizations. The ability to respect difference wasn't just a moral virtue. It was a practical necessity for any species hoping to thrive in a galactic community. The Tarathi made their recommendation to the United Nations First Contact Committee 2 weeks later. They proposed that humanity be granted provisional membership in the galactic community with certain conditions. Earth would have access to some basic technologies and would be allowed to establish embassies and engage in limited trade. But full membership with all its benefits and responsibilities would require continued progress on social issues, including inequality, discrimination, environmental protection, and conflict resolution. The galactic community would check in on humanity's progress in 10 years to assess whether full membership was appropriate. The announcement sent waves of excitement and debate across Earth. Some people celebrated humanity's entry into galactic civilization. Others worried about losing human independence or being judged by alien standards. Politicians argued about what the conditions meant and how to meet them. But gradually, a consensus emerged. This was an incredible opportunity and humanity needed to rise to the challenge. For Marcus and Horizon Technologies, the contact with the Tarathi brought unexpected opportunities. The galactic community had technology that they were willing to share with provisional member species, including advanced propulsion systems that would make interstellar travel practical. The Tarathi offered to work with human companies to adapt these technologies, and they specifically requested to partner with Horizon Technologies because of the company's commitment to ethical practices and inclusive culture. Over the next year, Marcus worked closely with Tarathi engineers to develop Earth's first interstellar-capable spacecraft. The project brought together the best human minds from dozens of countries and backgrounds, all working toward a common goal. The diversity of perspectives and experiences made the collaboration stronger and more innovative. Problems that stumped one group of engineers were solved by others approaching the challenge from different angles. The changes Marcus had implemented at Horizon Technologies became a model that other companies and organizations started to follow. The evidence was clear. Diverse and inclusive workplaces were more innovative, more productive, and better able to adapt to challenges. What had started as a moral imperative became recognized as a competitive advantage. Companies that embraced these principles thrived, while those that resisted fell behind. Marcus promoted many of the people he had met during his undercover work in the employee focus groups. Carmen Rodriguez became the director of the Interstellar Propulsion Division, leading the integration of Tarathi technology with human engineering. Carlos Rivera worked alongside her, finally able to use his degree and experience in meaningful ways. Nicole Turner moved into a senior role in intergalactic business development, helping to establish trade relationships with other species. Jerome Williams became Marcus's chief of staff, providing crucial insights on how policies and decisions affected employees at all levels. Katie Brooks, the receptionist who had started everything by refusing to let Marcus into the building, had a remarkable transformation of her own. She had thrown herself into understanding bias and discrimination, attending workshops and reading extensively. She became an advocate and educator, speaking at universities and conferences about her experience and the importance of examining assumptions. Marcus supported her growth, seeing in her story proof that people could change when given the opportunity and the right support. 2 years after first contact, Horizon Technologies launched the first human interstellar vessel. It was named Unity, symbolizing both the cooperation between humans and Tarathi and the coming together of diverse human cultures and backgrounds. The crew of 50 included people from 6 continents, representing dozens of nationalities and ethnicities. They were the best and brightest humanity had to offer, selected not just for their skills but for their ability to work together and represent the best of human values. Marcus stood in the control center watching the launch with pride and emotion. Next to him stood Ambassador Kelvin, who had become a friend over the past 2 years. The Tarathi diplomat observed that humanity had come far in a short time, but the real journey was just beginning. He reminded Marcus that joining the galactic community meant encountering civilizations that would challenge human assumptions and force continued growth. Marcus agreed, thinking about all that had happened since that morning when he walked into his own lobby and was turned away. That moment of discrimination could have been just another painful experience to endure and forget. Instead, it had become a catalyst for change that rippled far beyond anything he could have imagined. It had transformed his company, influenced humanity's first contact with alien life, and played a small part in opening the door to the stars. As the Unity accelerated away from Earth on its journey to establish humanity's first interstellar colony, Marcus reflected on the lessons of the past 2 years. Technology and ambition could take humanity to the stars, but only justice and compassion could help humanity thrive there. The work of building a fair and inclusive society was never finished. It required constant attention and effort, but it was the most important work anyone could do because everything else depended on it. The future stretched out before humanity like an endless frontier, full of possibilities and challenges. There would be setbacks and struggles, moments of failure and frustration, but Marcus felt hopeful because he had seen what humans were capable of when they committed to doing better. He had seen Katie Brooks transform from someone who acted on unconscious bias to someone who fought against it. He had seen his company evolve from one that unintentionally perpetuated discrimination to one that actively worked to dismantle it. He had seen humanity look beyond Earth and recognize that the diversity within their own species was preparation for the diversity they would encounter among the stars. Marcus turned away from the window and got back to work. There were new spacecraft to design, new partnerships to build with other civilizations, new challenges to overcome. But more importantly, there was the ongoing work of making Horizon Technologies and human society better, fairer, more just. That work would never be complete, but every day brought opportunities to make progress. And that, Marcus had learned, was what the journey to the stars was really about. Not just the physical distance humanity could travel, but the moral and social distance they could grow. The horizon was infinite, and so was humanity's potential to reach it together.